Nobody talks about this liquid, and the reason is simple. The moment people hear what it really is, they react emotionally instead of logically. But long before modern fertilizers existed, before bags of chemicals and expensive products became the norm, people depended entirely on understanding the land, and they discovered something that still works today. If you've ever looked at your soil and felt like it was tired, compacted, lifeless, or just refusing to grow healthy plants no matter what you add, then this video matters. Because what we're talking about here isn't a trick, it isn't a miracle, and it isn't new. It's old knowledge, ignored knowledge, and when it's used correctly, it brings dead soil back to life. Before we go any further, stay with me until the end, because the biggest mistake people make with this liquid is what causes it to fail. And once you understand that, everything changes. And if you care about growing food naturally, restoring soil instead of exhausting it, and learning things most people never hear about, take a second to subscribe, because this channel is about knowledge that actually works in the real world. Modern gardening has trained people to think the soil is just a container and plants are fed directly. But that's not how nature works. It's an ecosystem filled with bacteria, fungi, microorganisms, and tiny life forms that break down nutrients and deliver them to roots in a form plants can actually use. When that system collapses, the soil becomes dead, even if it still looks like dirt. You can pour fertilizer on dead soil and get a short-term response, but the soil itself doesn't heal. That's why people end up trapped in a cycle of buying more products every season. What ancient growers understood is that feeding the soil is more important than feeding the plant. And the liquid we're talking about today does exactly that when used the right way. Now, let's be clear and honest, because clarity builds trust. The liquid is human urine, plain and simple. Pee. That alone makes many people click away, but the soil doesn't care about taboos. And plants don't care about social discomfort. They care about chemistry and biology. Human urine contains nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and trace minerals. The same elements listed on fertilizer bags under UNPK. The difference is that this liquid is already dissolved, already available, and when diluted properly, it becomes an efficient food source for soil organisms. What turns people against it is misuse. Undiluted urine is too strong and can damage plants. Used properly, it becomes a tool that restores balance. The reason this method worked for centuries is because people didn't apply it blindly. They observed the soil, they diluted it heavily, and they treated it as a soil amendment, not a shortcut. One of the biggest myths is that this is about pouring something directly on plants and expecting instant miracles. That mindset ruins results. The goal is to activate microbial life. When microbes thrive, roots thrive, and when roots thrive, plants follow naturally. That's how dead soil comes back to life, not overnight, but steadily and sustainably. Timing matters more than people realize. Applying diluted urine to bone-dry soil wastes its potential. Applying it during intense heat causes nutrient loss. The best moment is when the soil is slightly moist and the sun is low, usually late afternoon. That moment microbes are active, evaporation is slower, and the soil absorbs nutrients instead of shocking the system. This is where most people fail, then blame the method instead of the misuse. Another critical detail almost nobody talks about is dilution. This is not optional. A safe and effective ratio is 1 part urine to at least 10 parts water. And in sensitive soils or containers, even more diluted. The goal is nourishment, not force. Strong concentration doesn't speed results. It destroys balance. Ancient growers knew this through observation, not instructions. Today, we have the advantage of understanding why it works, not just that it works. You might be wondering how something so simple can outperform expensive fertilizers? The answer lies in soil biology. Synthetic fertilizers feed plants directly but often bypass microbial life. Over time, microbes starve, soil structure collapses, and the soil becomes dependent. Diluted urine feeds microbes first. Those microbes then process nutrients gradually, improving soil structure, water retention, and root access. That's why many people notice that even after stopping applications, the soil remains healthier than before. You're not just feeding, you're rebuilding. Smell is another concern people bring up, and it's tied directly to misuse. When properly diluted and applied to soil, odor fades quickly. Persistent smell usually means too much concentration or surface application on dry ground. Healthy soil absorbs nutrients. Dead soil rejects them. That difference alone tells you a lot about soil condition. Safety also matters, and responsible use is key. This method is meant for soil application, not for spraying edible leaves right before harvest. Common sense applies, just like with compost or manure. Allow time between application and harvest. Focus on soil contact and keep the process clean and controlled. Use this way, the risks are minimal and the benefits are real. One of the most overlooked effects of this method is how it changes the way you think about gardening. When you stop chasing instant results and start focusing on soil health, everything slows down in a good way. You observe more, you intervene less. You trust natural systems again. That mindset shift alone improves results because you're no longer fighting the soil, you're working with it. If you've tried everything and your soil still feels lifeless, compacted, or unresponsive, this approach deserves consideration. Not because it's shocking or strange, but because it's logical. Dead soil doesn't need more products. It's life, and life responds to simple, balanced nutrition. What most people never realize is that this knowledge disappeared not because it stopped working, but because it doesn't sell well. It doesn't require a brand, a bottle, or a purchase. It requires understanding. And understanding is powerful. When you know why something works, you don't need to be convinced by marketing anymore. If this is the kind of content that helps you grow better food, spend less money, and understand your soil at a deeper level, make sure you're subscribed, because upcoming videos will show how to combine this method with organic mulch and dry matter to multiply its effect, and create soil that maintains itself season after season. Dead soil isn't permanent. It's a condition, not a destiny. When you feed the system instead of forcing the plant, the soil responds. And when the soil comes back to life, everything above it follows. That's the truth nobody talks about, and now you know it. What's interesting is that once people see the soil respond, their entire relationship with gardening changes. They stop asking, what pry next? And start asking, what does my soil need right now? That shift is subtle, but it's powerful. Dead soil doesn't fail because it lacks effort. It fails because it lacks the right conditions. Compaction, lack of organic matter, and absence of microbial life are far more damaging than most gardeners realize. This is why simply adding more fertilizer often makes things worse over time. You're forcing growth without repairing the foundation. The liquid we're talking about works not because it's magical, but because it fits into the natural cycle of nutrient recycling that soil evolved with. Another point that deserves attention is consistency. This method is not about daily application or constant intervention. In fact, overuse is one of the fastest ways to undo the benefits. Soil thrives on rhythm. Occasional, gentle feeding followed by periods of rest allows microbial populations to stabilize and expand. When that happens, roots penetrate deeper soil aggregates form, and water infiltration improves. These changes aren't always visible on the surface right away, but they're happening underground, where the real transformation takes place. People often expect dramatic visual changes in a matter of hours or days, but living systems don't work like switches. The first signs usually appear as subtle improvements, leaves with a deeper green tone, steadier growth instead of sudden spurts, fewer signs of stress during heat or dry periods. Over time, these small improvements compound. Plants become more resilient. Pest pressure decreases. Watering becomes less frequent because the soil holds moisture better. These are indicators of soil recovery, not just plant response. One mistake that quietly undermines results is combining this method with aggressive chemical inputs. Strong synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides can damage the very microbial life this approach is trying to support. If the goal is to revive soil, those inputs should be minimized or eliminated whenever possible. Otherwise, it's like trying to heal while constantly reopening the wound. Ancient systems worked because they were internally consistent. Everything added to the soil served the same goal: feeding life, not sterilizing it. It's also important to understand that this method doesn't replace organic matter. It complements it. Soil without carbon is like a body without fiber. Organic mulch, dry leaves, straw, and plant residues create habitat and long-term food sources for microbes. The liquid provides a quick boost of nutrients, while organic matter sustains the system. Used together, they create a synergy that accelerates recovery far beyond what either could do alone. This is why traditional systems always combined liquids with ground cover and composted materials. Some viewers may still feel skeptical, and that's healthy. Skepticism protects against blind adoption. But skepticism should lead to testing, not dismissal. The best way to understand this method is to try it on a small section of soil. Observe the response and compare it with untreated areas. Soil never lies. It responds honestly to what it's given. When people take this approach, doubts tend to disappear, replaced by curiosity and respect for how resilient natural systems really are. Another overlooked benefit is sustainability. Modern inputs rely on mining, industrial processing, and long supply chains. Ancient methods relied on local cycles. By closing nutrient loops, even on a small scale, gardeners reduce waste and dependency. This isn't about ideology, it's about efficiency. Nature wastes nothing. Every output becomes input somewhere else. When we align with that logic, systems become more productive with less effort. It's also worth addressing the psychological barrier. Many people feel uncomfortable with the idea not because it doesn't work, but because it challenges deeply ingrained cultural norms. Those norms are recent. For most of human history, resource reuse was standard. What changed wasn't biology, it was perception. Soil biology hasn't evolved away from these nutrients. Microbes still recognize them. Roots still benefit from them. The soil doesn't care what name we give the source. As you gain confidence using this method, you'll likely notice that your garden becomes more forgiving. Missed watering days don't cause immediate stress. Temperature swings affect plants less severely. This resilience is one of the clearest signs of living soil. Dead soil reacts sharply to every mistake. Living soil buffers them. That buffer is what makes gardening feel easier and more rewarding over time. Another key aspect is observation. Instead of following rigid schedules, pay attention to plant signals. Leaves tell stories. Soil texture tells stories. Smell tells stories. Healthy soil smells earthy and alive. If the soil smells sharp or sour, something is off. These sensory cues guided farmers long before instruments existed, and they're still valid today. Relearning how to read them reconnects you with the land in a way instructions never will. It's also important to say that this approach scales with understanding, not size. Whether you're working with containers, raised beds, or open ground, the principles remain the same. Dilution, timing, moderation, and observation. The scale changes, but the logic doesn't. That's why this knowledge survived for centuries. It was adaptable, not rigid. As we move forward on this channel, the goal isn't to shock or provoke, but to restore forgotten connections. When soil health becomes the priority, everything else falls into place. Yields improve not because you pushed harder, but because the system supports itself. Costs drop because fewer inputs are needed. And satisfaction increases because you're participating in a process that makes sense. If you've made it this far, you already understand something most people never learn. Dead soil is not a failure, it's a signal. A signal that life needs to return. And when you respond to that signal with balance instead of force, the soil answers back. Quietly, steadily, and reliably. That's how soil comes back to life. And that's why this liquid, used correctly, still works today.